So there is this other problem with Twitter. So I was wondering what you think, whether this is actually killing debate and what is its relationship is to gendered and other forms of identity.
I think social media has, in a sense, coarsened the debate further. On social media, you don't necessarily have two points of view. What is happening, though, is that the other parties are also catching up. I thought it was interesting that a few weeks ago or months ago, Mayawati, the Bahujan Samaj Party leader, also joined Twitter.
I mean, she
It wa-
felt compelled to, even
That's
though
right.
this is not her forte.
But, she felt
and she's disadvantaged as a woman, as a Dalit. These are not.
So, in my view, it represents the arrival, in a sense, of social media, that even traditional politicians now are embracing social media as a necessary means of communicating their message. But you do need an army out there to actually ensure that your message goes out more effectively.
Yes.
And that's where the right-wing strongman leaders tend to breed that kind of loyalist army, which is more than willing to take that message across. But you're quite right. I think as a result, the discourse has become less civilized. The discourse is more prone to manipulation. The discourse is more one-sided. And dare I say that the discourse could lead to an autocratic tendency emerging in our politics, where it's my way or the highway. Either you accept my viewpoint or you're treated as anti-national.
But do you think this Twitter is anti-women in some ways?
Look, women certainly are. It's not just women. It's several vulnerable groups who don't have the same access, perhaps, to striking, to have a forum to strike back. Where are the forums, for example, in this country for the farmer groups who have been protesting and who have come on the street?
Sure.
It's not as if there haven't been farmer protests organized in this country, but where are the fora for those farmers to amplify their message using social media?
Right.
They've been able to organize using social media, which is interesting.
Yes.
And I think we've got to recognize that. A Dalit protest last year on a Bharat Bandh was virtually leaderless, but was organized using social media, using WhatsApp, sending out messages. Similarly with some of the farmer protests in Maharashtra and other parts of the country. But beyond that, will they be able to use will their voice be heard above the cacophony? I don't know. And I think that reflects on not just so much social media, but just the you see, social media still remains dominated, I think, by an urban middle class narrative.
Interesting.
That's by and large, the urban middle class drives the social media narrative by and large.
The traditional media is dominated by a certain kind of view. And that kind of view is, and this is quoting a lot of folks that I've heard who say this, is ignoring the silent mainstream majority. And the silent mainstream majority has found a voice with social media. Now, what do you have to say to that?
Of course, it's provided the silent majority. It has empowered the so-called silent majority. It has perhaps democratized the discourse by allowing more people to be part of the debate. But it also comes without any rules and regulations. This discourse is taking place in the absence of any kind of code of ethics, any code of conduct. That's where the issue comes of the manner in which social media is used to promote some element of gender prejudice and violence, caste prejudice and violence, religious hatred. How do you control the vile, hateful comments that are up there all the time on social media? People who make those vile comments are sometimes followed by the leaders of the day. Who's going to control that? It's operating in this completely uncontrolled, chaotic space at the moment. And that, to my mind, makes it a double-edged sword. And unless you're able to create some kind of a regulatory mechanism within which social media operates, it's a recipe for anarchy.
That's right. And I think this is a good segue into the question of what, if at all anything, should we do about social media. Now, last week you may have seen that Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's a Democratic presidential candidate, came out with what I think is a fairly provocative and radical proposal. She said that if she is voted into power, she is going to break up the big companies. Do you think this is something we can think of?
At the moment, it's happening much too ad hoc. Suddenly the parliamentary committee of parliament decides we are going to summon the Twitter head, or the IT minister says I'm going to call in Mark Zuckerberg. That's not going to be, that's no solution.
That's right.
I think we need a regulatory architecture. Maybe it has to be a global regulatory architecture, since these are global companies. But even in the Indian context, I think you do need some kind of a regulatory architecture in which these big companies are made to function. And if they don't, I think you're going to have to find ways in which they are, without going the Chinese way.
So you prefer this to government control?
Look, the experience of government control in this country is awful.
That's right.
It never really leads to genuine regulation. It leads to censorship. And I don't think that's what we want. I think we need some kind of a broad regulatory mechanism to which everyone conforms, including TV channels. I think TV channels at times have also got away with far more than they should, because I think the regulatory framework remains weak. And if we could have, maybe on the lines of Ofcom, in the context of television, of course, but if we can evolve a social media architecture within which big companies are forced to function, I don't see why it shouldn't be tried.
Do you think that it's time perhaps to not think of social media as a monolith? Break it up into different kinds of parts. And for the part which is essentially used for public broadcasting, we make them liable as editors of newspapers or TV channels.
Yes, you can, but drawing those lines is not so easy. Let's say I'm an individual who is sending out news through my Twitter feed or through my Facebook news feed. Am I liable, or is Facebook or Twitter liable? Who is liable? Is it the platform, or is it the individual who's using the platform?
So currently the law is that the platform is not liable
That's
if
right.
it can show that it has taken some due diligence measures
Yes.
to make sure that it's got its controls in place.
Right.
But still it's happening, right? It's happening all the time that vile content is spread, hate speech is spread, and platforms, it's not hurting platforms because it's not the law that tells them to do anything more, and it's not hurting them monetarily, because actually this kind of vile talk is increasing their popularity.
Sure, but we need deterrence. I was glad to see in the morning newspapers that in the case of Barkhadat,
Yeah, I saw.
Yes.
4 people have been arrested. They're all out on bail. I mean, one has been put in judicial custody because I think he specifically went well beyond just abuse into sort of direct harassment. But at least it's a start.
But it took her initiative, her labor. It wasn't as if the social media company intervened to protect her. It was
The social media company does very little. Let's not say nothing, does very little to intervene in such cases. The individual intervened in this case, but the cybercrime cell at least acted. Now, this was in the case of someone who is a well-known public figure. Would they act in the case of someone who's not? Companies need to be much more conscious that their platforms are being misused. And they cannot shrug off liability by saying, look, we're an open source platform. We don't believe in any form of controls or any form of censorship. That has to change. How that has to change is the question. How are you going to ensure that these large companies are made more liable?
Thanks very much, Rajdeep, for
Thank you,
joining
sir.
us
All good,
today.
Shruti. Thank you very much.